What's going on, everybody? I'm back with another video. This video is going to be looking at how Manchester City bounced back from their Champions League exit and went on to win their Premier League match against Newcastle by a score of 5 goals to 0. This match was especially crucial because of Liverpool dropping points against Tottenham. So it's all in Manchester City's hands, and it's in their hands to lose. But a big statement, big 3 points today with a big scoreline gives them a little bit more comfort in the goal difference department. So, a very exciting end to the season. And before we get into that, this video is brought to you by the OneFootball app. It's the best app out there for all things football. It's the app I use to stay up to date with the biggest games, the leagues all across the world, and the biggest news in football. It's a must have for anyone who follows football for any different reason. It's a quality app and it's completely free. It's that. So check out the link in the description below and download the app, show your support. Again, I wouldn't recommend it myself if I didn't have it downloaded, and that's me on your screen going through the app and showing you the features. So be sure to check that out in the description, and while you're there, check out both my books and check out Keyframe. It's how I'm making this video. Now let's get right into the tactics of the team. So Manchester City in their build-up phase built with Ederson splitting the two central defenders and the fullbacks remaining in the wide area. So this was a little bit different, and we'll see how the shape from Manchester City changed just so slightly. So Rodri was then partnered with Gundogan as the double pivot, which allowed them to then build up very well against Newcastle's 4-3-3. So in this 4-3-3, they often mirror the way Liverpool might press, with one central forward using his cover shadow to block access to one of the double pivots, and then the wide wingers alongside the central striker are pressing from out to in using their cover shadow to block access to the fullbacks. This is why the fullbacks maintain such a wide width and a higher height, because it gives them positional superiority over the wide wingers, over the narrow wingers, and puts these players out of the pressing distance of these wingers. So from here, Ederson would then be able to then play these passes with more safety and allow Manchester City to progress around Newcastle's block. But then we also have the availability to break Newcastle through central areas through this free double pivot, who's then trying to be blocked by Chris Wood's cover shadow. So from here, if this was a potential avenue, which we'll look at in just a moment, we would then gain access to the numerical superiority that Manchester City create through the midfield of their build-up, with a 4 or 5-man midfield at times and single width. So we see then here a picture of how Manchester City can then use their double pivot to then gain access to their numerical advantage through their midfield. So as we see our double pivot here, Chris Wood is taking out Gundogan as the player he's targeting when he goes to press the central defenders. But then we don't have a midfielder jumping quite as high to then gain access to Rodri. So what this then creates is the opportunity to break the press through Rodri in central areas. So from here we'll have strong diagonal connections into more advanced areas through the half spaces. As we see, De Bruyne positioned in the left half space will then be mirrored by a player in the right half space, and as a failsafe, if this pass is played and these avenues are pressed and shut down, they can restart or play through the wide area for safety and take the longer route to progress the ball, which would then be the wide area and progressing around Newcastle's block. So now moving into the midfield third, with Manchester City, we have Fernandinho being subbed on, which changed some of the tactics being used and some of the concepts being implemented. So now we see in the double pivot partnership, Rodri dropping between central defenders, forcing them to fan into the half spaces and allowing the wingbacks to occupy full width and creating asymmetry. So this asymmetry comes from the midfield diamond with now the single pivot. So we have a 5-man baseline structure with our wingbacks then just being created and creating dual width on this left hand side and single width on the right hand side. So this also offers a lot of flexibility to the midfield in adjusting their shape and rotating with the wide areas, as well as this vacant spot alongside the single pivot, allowing players to dynamically access this to either narrow or move the Newcastle opponents, allowing Manchester City to progress via numerical advantages or progress through the vacant wide areas. So for Newcastle, we see in their 4-3-3, which would then turn to more of a 4-5-1 as they would go into deeper areas. But in this instance, having a three-man build-up made it a bit harder to press because of the closer distances that these wingers played to the wide central defenders, and it allowed for the distance to decrease between the wing backs and the central defenders now, because now the wing backs could occupy higher and wider areas while the press became more narrow because of the three-man buildup rather than the two-man buildup. So by the Newcastle players being in close proximity, when the ball would go into the wide central defender, they would have to go and press and engage so they wouldn't then be played around very quickly. So by this happening and the players pressing in a shorter manner, the space would open up in the wide areas to then be exploited. And coupled with this, the interior and the central strikers of the Manchester City team often affected the back four to make them very narrow, also giving more freedom to the wide areas and players to rotate in or progress around the Newcastle shape. When Manchester City didn't go with a midfield third build-up consisting of three central defenders, they then went with a double pivot, and from here we often saw a lot of movement, especially in this left-hand half space. Now in this instant we have De Bruyne occupying this area and the right side being vacant, open to a player inverting off the wing, or even Cancelo making an inverted underlapping run to then exploit the space. But we often saw this with Zinchenko on the left hand side and De Bruyne maintaining his spacing on the right hand side. But now with the partnership between Zinchenko and Jack Grealish on this left hand side, Jack Grealish often stayed wider, drawing the Newcastle players to then defend in the full width in their back line, creating separation between their wide fullback and their central defender, which would then often lead to underlapping runs being on and being able to exploit the space in behind and 2v1s in the wide area. But then we have our 4-1-4-1 or 4-5-1 from our Newcastle mid-block. So for Manchester City, the biggest concept and way they could hurt Newcastle was trying to find ways to get on the ball either between the lines in the half space or in behind, because with one of the central midfielders jumping to the defender, it leaves a bit of a gap in their vertical compactness and opens up space between the lines, which could either be used and exploited via pinning, rotations, or as a source to then look to create 2v1s with the wide area. So this was the route that Manchester City looked most dangerous when they took, and a lot of their movements targeted this area as well. So now for the last picture, we see the Manchester City structure in possession very well and the spaces they try and occupy. So we have our two central defenders now with a more narrow double pivot, and this is just a small nuance to try and create diagonal passes from the central defenders into the holding midfielders and have a slightly more vertical build-up, as well as putting the central defenders closer to the half spaces, making them more efficient in their attacking play and their offensive structure. But then from here, we often see an overload between the lines of four players, with Raheem Sterling inverting, allowing both fullbacks to advance, either in interior channels or occupying full width like on this right hand side. On the left, Jack Grealish takes it, allowing then Zinchenko to make inverted runs through the half spaces and occupy space between the lines. But then from here, with the double pivot on the ball past the lone central striker, we then activate the midfielders of Newcastle in their 5-4-1 and try and force them to jump into areas, which leaves players free between the lines with strong connections to the players on the ball. And when their shape gets too compact, either centrally or vertically, we have the double pivot to exploit the vertical compactness, and we have the width and height to exploit the horizontal compactness and their high line to then look for balls in behind and more of a direct route going around the block when they did become hyper compact because of this overloaded space between the lines. Now that's where we're going to wrap up the analysis. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one.